Okay, in this final lesson of our journey through time, we're ready to pick up the story with the formation of rocky planets. And you'll recall that rocky planets are only possible when the universe has enough heavy elements out of which to make these rocky planets. So in this drawing here, we see an enriched nebula, so mostly hydrogen with some helium, but it is enriched with heavy elements from previous generations of stars and supernova. The heavy elements are the materials out of which the rocky planets will form. But how does the process get going? So scientists think that sometimes what happens is that a nearby supernova shock wave causes this cloud to collapse and begin rotating. At the center of the cloud, we'll have the star, again, mostly hydrogen with some helium, and then the surrounding heavy elements and bits of space dust are going to aggregate into protoplanets. So initially, some of the atoms of the heavy elements and small molecules, they can actually sort of stick together by electromagnetic forces. Some atoms and molecules have charges on them, so they can come together in smaller particles. And then larger particles are subject to gravity, so we get small rocks and chunks of ice being pulled together into larger rocks, finally into protoplanets. So gravity is really the main architect, the builder of planets. And here we see an artist's rendering of the formation of a protoplanet. This diagram summarizes the process. Again, we have an enriched nebula up here in the top left, and we've got gravity collapsing the cloud, causing rotational motion. At the center will be the star, and then the surrounding material in the disk will organize out into planets. Now, the rocky planets are composed of those heavy elements, but the gaseous planets like Jupiter and Saturn would be mostly made up of hydrogen and helium, the very same materials that we find in the star. In the drawing on the left here, again, we see the formation of the star, the center of the solar system, and planets. Now notice some of these planets, I've drawn them, I've tried to indicate they've cleared their orbits. Remember, NASA defines a planet, it's got to be orbiting a star, it's nearly round, so it's big enough where gravity sort of shapes it into a sphere, and then it has cleared its orbits of other debris. And these pictures on the right kind of indicate that the process of clearing the orbit has not quite been completed. But once these planetary bodies get large enough, then of course gravity can pull other debris into those bodies and start to clear the orbits. So in our solar system, the inner planets have cleared their orbits, the outer planets have cleared their orbits, although there is that asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. And sometimes bits of this leftover material that didn't get incorporated into a planet strike our atmosphere, and we see them as meteors. Here's a meteor captured in a 20-second exposure. We have the Milky Way up here. This was taken in Chile, and the bits of rock will burn up in the atmosphere. Sometimes you call that a shooting star. Now recently, NASA has taken a picture of a nebula. Embedded in the nebula was what they think is a very young star, a star that has just begun to shine. And here's the bit that they're going to zoom in and crop in, and here is a picture of what they think is a very, very young star. It has just turned on. Nuclear fusion has begun and has begun to shine. And of course, the solar winds will push away some of the surrounding dust and gas, and you'll then the remainder of that material in that disk there has the potential to form planets. In Chile, there's the array of radio telescopes at the Atacama facility, and these telescopes were recently pointed at a patch of sky looking at one particular star called HL Tauri. And here we see the bit of the nebula they were pointing at, and at the center of this image is the star HL Tauri. But what was interesting is that they discovered evidence of a disk of material around that star, and what's more, there appeared to be these gaps in the form of rings around the star. And so scientists speculated that we're witnessing, in a sense, some planetary bodies that are clearing their orbits. And that's why we see these empty rings at different locations around this star. Where you see this material, this red material, that would be still material in the disk that has not yet sort of gravitationally been pulled together to form a protoplanet. But where you see the gaps in these rings here, that would be a planet, in a sense, clearing its orbit. So this kind of image then is one of the first images of a different solar system than our own in the process of formation. Our solar system would have sort of looked like this 5 billion years ago. So far then, we've learned that galaxies are giant collections of stars bound together by gravity. There's dust and gas still there to make new stars and new solar systems. A solar system would be a star with orbiting planets, and we've seen there's different kinds of planets. The rocky planets are made from the heavier elements, and the gaseous planets like Jupiter and Saturn made from hydrogen and helium, the same kind of stuff that stars are made of. But today, scientists are confident that most stars have planets. And in fact, scientists have detected evidence of some of these planets. They're called exoplanets. A planet that orbits another star is called an exoplanet. Now, how do they detect these exoplanets? The technique can be shown with this picture right here. So this is a picture of our sun, and that spot there is Mercury. So sometimes, the way our orbits are running, Mercury will pass in front of our sun, and we can take a picture of that. Now, if you compare the picture of our sun without Mercury in front of it and the sun with Mercury in front of it, a little bit of the light is blocked by Mercury. And a sensitive camera can detect the slightest decrease in light when a planet passes in front of the star. So this is one of the main ways that scientists are now detecting exoplanets. They're taking pictures of stars, and they're looking to see whether the light from the star diminishes ever so slightly for some period of time. That would be evidence that a planet is orbiting in front of the star, transiting across the surface of the star, as it were. So a sensitive camera is looking for temporary decreases in starlight that could indicate the presence of an exoplanet. One of the recent missions was called TESS, for a Transiting Exoplanet Survey Satellite. And in fact, there have been so many planets discovered now by these techniques that scientists are pretty confident that most of the stars in our galaxy, in our old galaxy, have planets. Notice the galaxy has to be old to have rocky planets anyway, because the rocky planets are made from heavy elements, and that required previous generations of stars and supernova to enrich those nebula with the heavy elements. But the idea today is most of the stars you see in the night sky have planets. It's an exciting recent discovery in astronomy. So now, in our next transition, then, we're ready to consider what can happen on these rocky planets. And what can happen is chemistry. So chemistry can produce complex molecules from simpler molecules. Now, that chemistry is facilitated by having some kind of liquid on the surface of the planet. And astronomers define a planet that has liquid water on its surface that is in the habitable zone. So the habitable zone would be the orbital distance in which the energy from the star is such that the planet can have liquid water on its surface. Now, Mars was thought to once have water. There's evidence of water in the early history of Mars. Today it doesn't. All the water is frozen as ice. Venus was possibly thought to have some liquid water, but today it's really hot, so all the water has evaporated into the atmosphere of Venus, so it's water vapor. But so we're kind of talking about the orbital distance between Venus and Mars would be the habitable zone around our particular sun. And again, what habitable zone means that we get liquid water on the surface. Here we see a little lake near Lassen National Park. So again, when we look out into the night sky, we want to think, given the statistics, if all these stars have planets, well then statistically there are going to be lots and lots of those planets that are in the habitable zone. So there are many, many habitable worlds out there. In fact, there's one just 40 light years from Earth, the TRAPPIST-1 system. Scientists have discovered multiple planets in this solar system. And in fact, they're near Earth size, and several of them are in the habitable zone. In this picture, you see the liquid water here for some of these planets. Of course, the planets farther away from the star would be in colder zones here, so the water would be ice. Now, this particular star is interesting. It's called an ultra-cool dwarf star. It's only 9% the mass of the Sun, so it's not that much bigger than Jupiter. But it is a star that has multiple rocky planets, and several of them are in the habitable zone. Now let's return to the significance of water on the surface of the planet. Why is water so important? Water is a very good solvent for chemistry. So lots of different kinds of molecules dissolve well in water, and that allows them to interact and undergo chemical reactions with each other. So let's set the stage. Some 4 billion years ago, or about 10 billion years after the Big Bang, deep under the oceans in these rocky volcanic vent structures, lots of scientists think some really interesting chemistry was cooking up in these little rocky chambers. And just think about the time frame. We're talking about hundreds of millions of years of experimental chemistry going on in these rocky chambers. And the idea is that at one point in time, those complex molecules assembled into a cellular structure, the first living thing on planet Earth. And if this is the case, then we really do live on one strange rock. It is a rock that produced life. Now, of course, what we define as a living cell, it has the capacity for reproduction. So here we see a bacterial cell in the process of dividing into 2 bacterial cells. And that capacity for reproduction then allowed living things to spread across the Earth and colonize the Earth. So this then, the origin of life, would be the start of something amazing here on planet Earth. The stage is set for evolution. Living things evolved. They changed over time. They evolved into more complicated cellular life and then multi-celled organisms that we call plants and animals. So the story of Earth is an amazing story. We begin with a lifeless rock some 4.5 billion years ago, and then we have the emergence of life, simple cells like bacteria-type cells, and they went on over 4 billion years to evolve into millions of living species today. So we have reached the final stage in our journey through time, that chemistry can produce life, at least on one planet that we know of. So when we think about our solar system, here we see all of our planets here, and of course our sun is providing critical energy to support all the living ecosystems on planet Earth. But it is just so striking that our planet just seems so different than the rest of the rocky planets in the inner solar system because of the presence of us, life. Now, whether Mars had life, that's an open question. But we know of life on Earth as carbon-based. Lots of the complex molecules found in cells have lots of carbon in them and depended on water. And that was another important thing about having a liquid water on the surface. And of course, our sun is powering a lot of the living systems on our planet. So we want to think of life as a planetary phenomenon. In other words, living things grew out of this rocky body that had water on its surface and had lots of diverse chemical reactions going on that produced a living thing. It's quite amazing. Of course, that also means that living things are connected to our universe in deep ways. So since life emerged on planet Earth, all living things on Earth are also made of star stuff. So here we are orbiting our sun. Living things are populating this planet. Living things grew out of this planet. Living things were produced by chemistry on this planet. But all of those atoms were forged inside stars. Stars cooked up all the different atoms of the different elements, ejected them out into the nebula through supernova, and they were then incorporated into rocky planets on which, at least one that we know of, life emerged. So we are connected to the stars, connected to the universe in this deep way. The astronomer Harlow Shapley once said, "We are brothers of the boulders, cousins of the clouds." Actually, if we want to be inclusive here, we could say, we are brothers of the boulders, sisters of the seas, and cousins of the clouds. So what's our story then? Well, the atoms made by stars, ejected into space by supernova, chemically bonded to form simple molecules in the dust of nebulae, which later swirled around a new star and built larger particles and rocks under the influence of electrostatic and gravitational forces. ultimately assembled into a planet with water on its surface and a great diversity of chemical reactions, which after hundreds of millions of years produce the molecules with the capacity to make a living cell. Quite a story. So we've reached then the end of our journey here. We have considered our place in the universe sort of spatially. We are on a rocky world orbiting an average star in one arm of a galaxy, one galaxy among hundreds of billions in our universe. And in time, we, of course, have just emerged in our old universe. So because of our big brains, we can figure out our place in the cosmos. And we can ponder whether we're alone in our galaxy. Are there other intelligent communicating civilizations in our galaxy? But if so, of course, they too are going to be studying their place in the galaxy. They too are going to be drawing pictures like this to situate themselves. Where are they in the Milky Way galaxy? They will have learned about planets and stars and galaxies and the observable universe. They too have a history, a journey through time as well. So the story that we tell about our history, a lot of it overlaps with the story that they're going to be telling about their history as well. In other words, we share a universal history. So if we were to meet them, we go into their history classes or their science classes, there's a lot of shared information that we'll be able to understand about their story, because their story is also, to a large extent, our story.